Shalom, welcome to the Jewish View. My name is Rabbi Nachman Simon with the Chabad House of Dalmar, and today we're going to talk about a very interesting subject you probably have never heard about, but I'm sure you'll be interested after we start discussing it. It's called Yud-Tes Kislev. Well, let me explain to you even what the name means, because in Hebrew they always use the gematria, numerical value, from Hebrew letters to numbers. So Aleph, the first letter, is 1. Beis is 2. So Yud-Tes stands for 10. Yud is for 10. Tes is for 9. And you get 19. And Kislev is the Hebrew month. It's really, if you're familiar, it's the month of Hanukkah. So Hanukkah is the 25th day of Kislev. So this is 6 days beforehand. So what happened on the special day that I'm sure most people haven't heard about? Well, it happened a few hundred years ago, and let me frame the historical and the situation that was before them. There's been many movements in Judaism, many Torah Orthodox movements throughout the ages, and things have changed. Essentially, it hasn't changed. The Torah, the mitzvahs, the 613 mitzvahs, has not changed because they're all holy and from the Bible. On the other hand, obviously some of those 613 mitzvahs are irrelevant today because, for example, many mitzvahs, many commandments have to deal with the temple in Jerusalem. Temple in Jerusalem was destroyed 2,000 years ago by the Romans. Well, they had sacrifices in the temple, and the law says the sacrifices can only be held in the temple. No temple, no sacrifices. So therefore, things a little bit have changed, but they're still relevant, meaning in the sense that in the future we hope for the Mashiach, the Messiah, to come, then all the 613 mitzvahs, commandments, will be relevant again. So there are different changes in Torah throughout the 3,300 years since the Torah was given at Mount Sinai. On the other hand, that there has been some specific changes. One of those changes was the Chassidic movement 250 years ago. And I always explain it. My example is changes that are, like we're saying, well, Torah doesn't change, but there are changes. What are you talking about? So it means as follows. For example, you have a keyboard on the piano. There's 88 keys on the keyboard. So when a person plays a new tune or composes a new tune, well, that they didn't come up with a new tune with a new note. It's the same note as everybody else has been using, but they arranged it different. Obviously, in a simple sense, you're hitting this key a lot more and this key less, and you have a new composition. It's the same notes, though. So this is what idea of the movement in Judaism. You don't ever add on more than in our example, 88 notes, or in our idea, 613 mitzvos, and you don't subtract from them. So what's the difference? Sometimes it's emphasized differently. So therefore, while we're talking about the Chassidic movement, certain things that were, maybe we can say, on the back burner in Judaism became for the front burner, and some from the front burner was put in the back burner. What do I'm talking about? That the idea of happiness and joy was very paramount in the Chassidic music. Even today you hear about Chassidic music festivals. Well, why isn't a Jewish music festival? The answer to that is that in classic Judaism, as I told you before, there was 2,000 years ago, the temple was destroyed. Well, that put the Jewish people into exile, and in a very general sense, in a state of mourning. I mean, no one goes around and mopes and gropes, but on the other hand, that there is this sense, certain things that you always remember, the mourning of the temple. Maybe you've gone to a Jewish wedding, and obviously a wedding is a very joyous occasion. Music, and there's dancing, good food. All right, beautiful, everybody's dressed up. But one of the customs under the chuppah, under the canopy where the bride and groom are married, is that they take a glass cup and they crush it with their left, with the groom actually crushes it with his left foot. What are you breaking a cup? You're supposed to be happy. You have to break something. So the idea is that the rabbi said, fine, we know you're super happy, especially the bride and groom, probably the parents too, once they, get their kids married. But everybody's happy at a wedding. And they said, well, wait a minute, you're getting super happy around here, but you do have to remember that don't be so happy because the temple is destroyed. And that breaking of the glass symbolizes a little bit of the, someone breaks something, oh, you go, at the dinner table, oh, that was a good dish. Oh, what did you break it? So it puts a little bit of a fog over the joy. And so that's what I'm saying. It's one example that there always stayed in mourning. So that was Judaism for a few thousand years until 250 years ago. The Baal Shem Tov, who was the founder of the Chassidic movement, taught, put that in the back burner and actually put happiness in the front burner. What's the idea behind it? The idea is that, yes, we're thinking about 2,000 years ago, and we do always think about it. Destruction of the temple, and the Jewish people would love to return back to Israel and build up the temple. And again, we are waiting for the Mashiach, the Messiah, to do that. But on the other hand, that we have to look, the Baal Shem Tov, to the future. Don't just drive in the rear view mirror into the past, but look for the future. And the future is very soon when we'll have the Mashiach, the Messiah, and will be redeemed the Jewish people. It was 250 years ago. So he changed the emphasis. That's what I'm trying to say. Now, the Alter Rebbe, again, may I back up a little bit, the Baal Shem Tov had a successor, the Maggid, the preacher from Mizrach, and then it broke off into many areas, of course. The Holocaust destroyed so much of Eastern Europe, and thank God didn't wipe it out totally, completely. But on the other hand, wiped out 6 million Jews, and they're all in Eastern Europe. And there were a lot of course, cities, to say the least. It was all over. You got Russia and Poland and Hungary and on and on. Eastern Europe's a big area, and there's a lot of little cities. And there were a lot of small little Chassidic dynasties and many cities throughout Eastern Europe. And they all had a major leader or a minor leader. And because these were from the Chassidic movement 200 years ago, they had leaders and they had their sons and they became in turn leaders. One of the biggest movement was the Chabad Lubavitch movement, which is even revitalized today and very big, and even in our capital district. But this is a story for the first Chabad Chassidic Rebbe, and he lived around 1800, a little before, and passed away in 1812. And he again was teaching about the Chassidic movement to many people. Again, framing the history was that the Jewish people were down and trodden. It's hard to see that today. You look around, your two major Jewish communities. Number one now, it used to always be United States, but really is now Israel. They're growing. And, of course, they have the troubles, and you read about with the Arabs. But on the other hand, it's flourishing, and it's great, and people should visit Israel because it's very, it's a proud, modern society. So they're doing well. And Jewish people in America, we look around, and for the most part, they're doing well. Again, there's always exceptions to the rule, but for the most part, so we said, what's downtrodden about the Jewish communities in the world? Well, again, like I said, you look around, you're not going to see that, but you have to, a few hundred years ago, they were downtrodden. In Europe, they were considered second-class citizens. For the most part, they were oppressed. There was pogroms in Russia. They beat Jewish people up, even with the acceptance of the government at that time, the Tsarist government. So it wasn't really a good place for the Jewish people. Jewish people, thrived and they were successful in their own right, but there was a lot of oppression. So a few hundred years ago, that it was even worse. There was a lot of poverty. The truth is there's poverty today also, but surely not as great as that was beforehand. So again, you're poverty-stricken, you're downtrodden, you're prejudiced against, and you feel, down in the dumps, where the Chassidic movement brought up the Jewish people in order to make them feel good. God loves them. Let's do a mitzvah that's very important to the world, and therefore let's make it a better world as much as we could. Now, as I just said, the czarist government, again, hopefully you know from your modern European history, but again, we're, thank God, in a free country in the United States. You could say what you want. You can talk against the president. He's a schmo, whoever it is, whatever, who's ever the president. You can talk about your political leaders. You could say, I'm voting him out. I don't want him anymore. You can say all that, and we are, thank God, in a free country. On the other hand, you have to contrast that to a czarist Russia a few hundred years ago. You didn't say the czar is a bum. They could put you in jail for that. Again, you can say that to a political figure today. There's comedians all over the place that say it right on television. You don't have to hide. No one pulls them away and throws them in jail. Again, thank God we're in this country, but it wasn't that way under czarist Russia. And therefore, that anybody who said anything against the government was in terrible troubles. Well, of course, you should know, and this is a major idea, the Jewish person, even if they are in a oppressive regime like the czarist Russia, does not make revolutions. I know there were Jewish people who made the communist revolution. They weren't religious people. They were Jews, but they weren't religious, because Torah tells you do not rebel against the government that you're residing in. In any case, so the Chabad Rebbe, who was called Rabbi Schneur Zalman of Liadi, didn't rebel against the government, but they were always hypersensitive. Like a dictatorship is always looking out who's rebelling and who's making remarks, and they're always looking. Again, you can see that, and not to get into politics, but a communist China today, you say something against the government, or North Korea, that they do throw people in jail. They even kill people for saying something against the ruling regime. So they're hypersensitive against any of these, political rebellion, if you want to say. In any case, so they were looking at the Rebbe, and there was a few things. There were, like I say, he wasn't rebelling against the czarist regime, but since they were so sensitive, there were people who, again, that's what people are. They're jealous of the growing Chassidic movement, so they made false libels against the Rebbe. I'll give you just a few ideas what they were saying. Again, going back in history, Russia at that time was fighting against Turkey. Turkey is right in the southern part of Russia. They were fighting against each other, and again, knowing a little bit of history, now we know that there's free states in the Middle East, Jordan, Israel, Arabs, Jews. These are free, independent countries. But the Ottoman Empire, which was Turkey, ruled over the Middle East. Again, we're talking 200 years ago. Really, they released the rulership of Israel after World War I, because Turkey was fighting against the English, Americans too, but the England, and they said, this is part of our booty. We're taking over Israel. And that's why when Israel got their independence in 1948, it was against the British. But that's thumbnail history. So there were always Jews, even though, like I just said, 1948, Israel got their independence, fine, but there were always Jews living in Israel, and they were very poor. And so the Jewish people take care of their other Jewish people. When people need it in Russia, there's always charity funds for Israel. Again, it's growing society. On the other hand, there is poverty. People do need help. And so that's what the Rebbe did. He says, well, we're going to send money to the poor people in Israel. Simple enough, pure enough. But people made, you're sending money, because like I said, Israel was ruled by Turkey, which was an enemy of Russia. You're sending money to Russians' enemies. Like I just told you what the truth is, and that was a libel. because that wasn't the truth at all. But again, it was up on trial. Again, you have that in dictatorships. They're very, very super sensitive against any movement against them or any rebellion. And another idea which was very refined idea of the Kabbalistic, I didn't explain that. One of the ideas besides happiness was using mystical ideas. Mysticism in Judaism was always there for thousands of years. Like I gave the idea with the piano, it was on the back burner, but the Chassidic movement brought it up to the front burner. So they use a lot of Kabbalah, which is Jewish mysticism. One of the ideas is that there are 10 spheros, 10 emanations from God. I mean, the God is one, and on the other hand, we're at the bottom end of the totem pole, if you want to say that, and obviously we're a very pluralistic world, billions of people, gazillions of, light years, and obviously we all know that, how many, even on the earth, there's billions of things compared to, look at the universe, how many stars there are, et cetera, et cetera. And how do you go from one God to a pluralistic world is he has the means of these 10 different spheros, which are in Hebrew spheros, but they emanations. Well, they have different names. One of them, to focus on what we're talking about, is the 10th one. The bottom one is Malchus, which means kingdom, Melech, king. And it doesn't diminish kingdom at the very least. But again, this is what I was trying to say. Again, same kind of idea. It's a libel. No one's saying the king is on the bottom of the totem pole. No one's saying that at all. That the king reigns over people, and that's a very important. You say Melech Olam, God is the king of the world. No one's degrading the king at all. But again, you have a libel that people make up a libel. They make up stories. That's what a libel is, making up stories against a person who's innocent, and they taking something totally out of context, and therefore they make a whole big case against somebody. So here again, that's what they were doing. They told the Tsar and Tsar's people, the ministers, the Hasidim are talking about all of a sudden this Jewish mysticism, the spheros, this emanation, and you know what the king is? Well, the Tsar says king's number one, he's on top. No, they're saying he's the 10th, he's the lowest guy on the totem pole. Again, like I explained to you, it's a total libel against, no one says that at all, but this is what they came up with. In any case, for those things, you can say what you want, again, just so blessed to be in this country, but for those charges about sending money to Turkey to an enemy and to making fun of degrading the king, the Tsar, that he was put on trial. And it was very serious. It's not just put him a year in prison, which is bad enough, I guess. But on the other hand, it could have been even a death penalty. Again, rebellion against the Tsar. They don't play around. And so what the Alter Rebbe, the first Lubavitcher Rebbe, he had to answer all these accusations. It was a real trial with real judges. And he, of course, answered everything and put everything to rest, and he was released on this. That's what we get to the beginning of the show. The 19th day of Kislev became a very, very big, joyous occasion for the Chassidic movement, which really the Chassidic movement in Russia, again, it's just revitalizing now the Jewish community. But again, since the communists took over in 1917, they suppressed terribly. Killed them. 1.5 million Jews, not just suppressed, killed people, 1.5 million Jewish people in Russia. They killed a lot of people, but amongst them 1.5 million Jewish people, and that they, at that turn, they closed up the synagogues, and you weren't allowed to have the Jewish day schools, the yeshivas, again, total suppression, and all that was left was a lot of underground synagogues that people were able to pray until Glasnost in 1990, and then now became open. And actually, you go to Russia today, and some Jews do tell me they go to visit there. I haven't, but they go there. Beautiful synagogues, and Jewish life is thriving again. But again, we're talking about before even the revolution, because we're talking 200 years ago. There were so many synagogues, and the Hasidic movement was practically 50% of the Jewish community in Eastern Europe, Poland and Russia, Hungary. It really flourished. So this is why it became a very, very big, happy occasion. Maybe people, like I say, now you know it, before maybe you didn't know it. In any case, Yud-Tes Kislev, again, the 19th day of Kislev, became very joyous. And you have a Farbrengen, again, to explain that, was people, Hasidim grouped together, they sing songs, and they tell about pretty much what I'm talking about, also retell the story and how grateful for we are, because if the Rebbe would have been, ostracized or, God forbid, even killed for rebellion, the Chassidic movement would have been totally, totally diminished, surely in Russia. So now that we're here today, as I said before, the Chabad Lubavitch movement is growing. Today was really, there's bumps in the road for the last few hundred years. Also wasn't easy, but in any case, right from the beginning, the get-go, the Chassidic movement would have been really a terrible situation. Probably would have been destroyed if they incarcerated or, God forbid, killed the Rebbe for that. So it's a big holiday today. One of the ideas, and there's many, many stories, but I'll tell you one story, that the Rebbe was incarcerated in a prison in an island, which isn't so odd again today, because there is Rikers Island today in New York. So they or Alcatraz was on an island. So so there was an island, and they ferried the Rebbe to prison every day and brought him back to the court every day and brought him back to the island, to the prison at night. So one of the commandments, and again, people maybe not know so much, it's not widely known, is that when there's a waxing moon, not a waning moon, a waxing moon, which is about the beginning of a lunar month, not exactly lunar, when you can see the moon and it's really growing until it becomes a full moon, which is the 15th day of a lunar month. So there is a blessing to be said, because the Jewish people are compared to the moon, and just like the moon is growing, waxing, so too that the Jewish people should wax and grow also. So he's on the boat, as the story goes. The Rebbe's on the boat, and he sees the moon. It's time to say a blessing. One of the idea is that you have to stand still while you're saying the blessing. So he asked the ship man, I don't know, it wasn't a motorboat, because they didn't have a motorboat, but they were rowing. Could he said, please stop the boat for a minute so while I say the blessing, like I'm supposed to. He's a prisoner. What are you going to listen to a prisoner? I'll get lost. I don't know exactly the words he said, but in essence he said get lost. And then, so then miraculously, the boat stopped and they couldn't move it. They're rowing. Why can't you move it? All right, then it stopped for a minute and then went on. Now the Rebbe again said, now I'm going to ask you again, could you stop the boat? Get lost, prisoner. I don't know what a prisoner says, but you're not in charge around here. And again, after a minute, that the boat stopped miraculously. They couldn't budge it. So then it started up again. And the third time that the Rebbe, finally says, I'm asking you a third time, could you please stop the boat? And he says, all right, he got the message. He better do it. He's a holy man, the Rebbe. And they stopped the boat, and he said his blessing and said, now you can go on. Now the president of Lubavitcher Rebbe explains, he says, well, if you wanted the boat to stop, the boat stopped the first time, miraculously, but it stopped. So say your blessing. Why did you have to wait till the third time? Finally, when the ship's captain said, all right, I'm stopping the boat. So this is a very important lesson the Rebbe always taught us. And he says that really, even though you're attached to God, and God does do miracles, many, many miracles, but the main idea is to work through natural means, not just to do things through miracles. And the Rebbe wanted to have the captain to say by his own cognizance, yes, I will stop the boat. So he said the blessing in a natural way, the captain stopped the boat for him, instead of saying it through a miraculous way. So that's an important lesson, especially of Chabad Chassidics, what the Rebbe was teaching. This is very, very important and very, very deep, because it's not that there's a God and there's a world and he's in charge of the world. He's actually part of the world. God made the world. He created and is constantly creating the world. So therefore, we have to show that the world, if you can call it the world or nature, is not antagonistic to godliness. It's really just another expression of godliness. Again, we talked about it a good few times on our television show, is that it's not science versus Torah. It's science as a complement to the Torah. Because if it's true science, I mean, maybe you can argue there's a lot of science out there is, just made up or really not on the ball because they change one thing after 1 year after another. But if it's truly scientific, it's proven, not just theorized, it's proven, then you know that it is all part of Torah. It's all part of the world that God created. So this is an idea of the Chassidic movement. It did grow from this, it blossomed literally. I mean, it's just a beautiful idea. Who's going to argue with, people are depressed, and then you say, well, be happy and be joyous and sing. Again, like I said, there's Chassidic music festivals. Be happy. Well, really, really, even now obviously, most of the Jewish community is not Chassidic in the world. On the other hand, it's penetrated this idea of happiness throughout all forms of Judaism. All Judaism, whether the regular Orthodoxy or conservative form, they all have music. They see how beautiful it is. Who's going to argue? To be happy, to have music, to have dancing. It's really permeated the entire Jewish community, no matter who they are, what they are, or what their observance is, that the idea of happiness. And again, Kabbalah is an in thing. Madonna, whatever, you hear these stories, that the mysticism is a very in thing. So even though, like I say, there's not a majority of the Jewish community are not Hasidim today, on the other hand, that it is like everybody has picked up the idea of being joyous, and number two, the idea of Jewish mysticism, the Kabbalah, which means like everybody appreciates a deeper idea. People are striving for something deeper and more meaning in their life, something deeper in their lives than just going to their material life. They want to look for something that's a little bit more godly, and they do find it, at least in some way or another, in the Chassidic dimension, in the Chassidic world. And that's why it's even to the non-Jews, the Jewish mysticism, people are looking at it, they're looking deeper, why things happen. These are all questions that, in a way that, then in school they don't tell you why is this and why is there. They just say it is. We'll tell you about the earth and we'll tell you about the moon. Why is there one moon, not two moons? Why is there, why is there a solar system? Why these planets? They say, well, we'll discuss it. We can tell you how big they are, and we'll find out. We'll send satellites to figure them out. But why? Why is it there that where science stops, mysticism takes over, and everybody's looking for a deeper dimension in their lives and in the world? And so therefore, just to conclude, the Chassidic world, even though it was a major force in the Jewish community, at least before World War II, and now it's rebounding, number one, but just its effect is reciprocated throughout the entire world. So thank you very much for talking about Yud-Tes Kislev.